Maid spent 6 years caring for Paralyzed Billionaire. What he did after recovery shocked her. Her dark hands, once scrubbing his marble floors, now traced gentle circles on his motionless chest. And neither the Maid nor the Paralyzed Billionaire knew that 6 years of whispered prayers would awaken something far more powerful than his ability to walk. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story. Because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now, let's get into the story. The morning sun filtered through silk curtains, casting golden rays across the pristine marble floors of the Whitman estate. Tamara Washington moved with quiet grace through the corridors, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her uniform crisp despite the early hour. At 24, she had mastered the art of invisibility that came with being domestic help in a billionaire's world. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 6 a.m. as she began her daily routine. Polish the banister, dust the priceless artwork, vacuum the Persian rugs that cost more than most people's cars. Her movements were efficient and purposeful, each task completed with a care that went beyond mere duty. In the kitchen, she prepared the morning coffee, imported beans from Colombia that Mr. Whitman insisted on having ground fresh each day. The bitter aroma filled the spacious room as she arranged the sterling silver service on a mahogany tray. Everything in this house gleamed with wealth, from the crystal decanters in the library to the gold-framed mirrors that reflected her brown face as she passed. But tucked beneath her narrow bed in the staff quarters, worn nursing textbooks whispered of dreams deferred but never abandoned. Fundamentals of nursing practice lay dog-eared beside anatomy and physiology, their pages filled with her careful notes in faded ink. 3 years of nursing school completed, 2 years remaining, if only she could afford it. The memory of her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Baby girl, you got healing hands. Don't you ever forget that." Mama had worked 3 jobs to get Tamara through those first 3 years before the cancer took her. Now, with her younger brother Marcus needing books for his senior year of high school, and her grandmother's arthritis medication eating through what little savings remained, the marble floors of the Whitman estate had become her reality. What do you think drives someone to keep pursuing their dreams, even when circumstances force them into a different path? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your story of perseverance. Upstairs, behind mahogany doors that cost more than Tamara's yearly salary, James Whitman was already dressed in his tailored Armani suit. At 35, he commanded a business empire worth $12 billion, his company's skyscrapers dotting city skylines across 3 continents. His brown hair was perfectly styled, his facial hair trimmed with precision, and his steel-gray eyes held the calculated sharpness of a man who had never known failure. He studied the financial reports spread across his marble desk, the numbers representing millions of dollars in quarterly profits. Each decision he made affected thousands of employees, but to James, they were merely statistics on a spreadsheet. Emotion was weakness. Attachment was liability. Success meant staying detached, staying focused, staying alone. The soft knock on his door interrupted his concentration. "Come in," he called without looking up. Tamara entered carrying the coffee service, her footsteps silent on the thick carpet. She had learned to move like a ghost in this house, present when needed, invisible when not. "Your morning coffee, Mr. Whitman." "Just set it down," he replied curtly, not sparing her a glance. To him, she was simply part of the house's machinery, efficient, reliable, and ultimately replaceable. As she poured the steaming coffee into his cup, Tamara noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched as he reviewed the documents. Her nursing training made her naturally observant of physical stress, but she knew better than to comment. The help didn't offer observations about their employer's well-being. "Will there be anything else, sir?" "No, that's all." She nodded and withdrew as silently as she had entered. James Whitman never saw the brief flash of concern that crossed her features, never noticed how she paused at the door for just a moment, as if sensing something fragile beneath his armor of success. The morning progressed in its usual rhythm. Tamara cleaned the East Wing, while James conducted business calls that moved millions across global markets. She prepared his lunch of grilled salmon and asparagus while he negotiated a merger that would close factories in 3 states. Their worlds existed in the same space, but on entirely different planes. By afternoon, storm clouds had gathered over the estate, their dark shadows creeping across the manicured lawns. Tamara was polishing the silver in the dining room when she heard the distinctive rumble of James's Lamborghini roaring to life in the circular driveway. Through the window, she watched him speed away, his tires spinning on the wet pavement as the first drops of rain began to fall. She frowned, noting how aggressively he had taken the curve at the estate's entrance. In her nursing classes, she had learned to recognize signs of stress and emotional turmoil. The way he had gripped his coffee cup that morning, the tension radiating from his shoulders, the reckless speed with which he now drove into the gathering storm, all pointed to a man pushing himself toward a breaking point. But Tamara Washington was just the maid. Her job was to clean his house, not concern herself with his demons. The call came at 4:17 p.m. Tamara was folding laundry in the service room when Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, burst through the door, her face pale with shock. "Tamara, there's been an accident. Mr. Whitman, his car, they're taking him to Metropolitan General." The silk shirt Tamara had been folding slipped from her trembling fingers to the floor. "How bad?" "Bad enough that they're calling for his emergency contacts. The whole household staff is being sent home except for essential personnel." Mrs. Henderson's voice cracked. "They don't know if he'll—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. That night, Tamara lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling as rain pelted her small window. The nursing textbooks seemed to glow in the darkness beside her, and her mother's voice echoed once again. "You got healing hands, baby girl." She had no way of knowing that in a sterile hospital room across the city, James Whitman lay motionless, his spine shattered, his billion-dollar empire suddenly as fragile as the man who had built it. She had no way of knowing that her life was about to change forever, or that the invisible maid would soon become the most important person in a broken billionaire's world. The storm raged on through the night, washing the world clean for what was to come. 3 weeks later, the Whitman estate felt like a tomb. The silence was different now, not the comfortable quiet of wealth, but the heavy stillness of a world holding its breath. Tamara polished the same banister she had cleaned 1,000 times before, but her movements lacked their usual purpose. The house itself seemed to mourn, its grand spaces echoing with emptiness. Mrs. Henderson found her in the library, methodically dusting books that would likely never be read again. "Tamara, they're bringing him home today." The feather duster stilled in her hand. She had heard whispers from the other staff, fragments of conversations about wheelchairs being delivered, about the master bedroom being converted, about nurses who had come and gone like revolving doors. 3 certified caregivers in 2 weeks, each one leaving after less than 4 days. "The nurses?" Tamara asked quietly. "Why do they keep leaving?" Mrs. Henderson's expression darkened. "He's different now. Angry. Won't let anyone touch him. Won't take his medications. Throws things. Curses at them until they run out crying." She paused, studying Tamara's face. "The agency is sending another one today, but honestly, I don't think she'll last any longer than the others." Through the tall windows, Tamara watched a medical transport van pull up the circular driveway. Her heart clenched as she saw the mechanical lift lowering, revealing a figure in a wheelchair that seemed impossibly small compared to the imposing man she remembered. James Whitman sat rigid in the chair, his brown hair disheveled, his once powerful frame diminished by weeks of hospital confinement. His facial hair had grown unkempt, and his steel-grey eyes held a fury that could have melted glass. Even from a distance, she could see the tension radiating from him, a caged predator realizing the bars of his prison were permanent. 2 orderlies wheeled him up the newly installed ramp, their movements careful and professional. Behind them walked a middle-aged nurse in crisp white scrubs, her expression already showing signs of apprehension. "Mrs. Patterson," Mrs. Henderson murmured. "4th one this month." Tamara set down her duster and smoothed her uniform. Something deep in her chest, some instinct born of her nursing training and her mother's teachings about healing hands, made her feet move toward the front entrance. The orderlies were explaining the wheelchair's functions to Mrs. Patterson when James's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Get out!" His words were low, but carried the force of absolute authority. The orderlies exchanged glances. "Sir, we need to get you settled, Dash." "I said get out." The roar that erupted from him echoed through the marble foyer, bouncing off crystal chandeliers and priceless paintings. All of you. I don't need your pity, your help, or your goddamn sympathy. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward with professional calm. Mr. Whitman, I understand you're frustrated, but dash. You understand nothing. His hands gripped the wheelchair's armrests, so tightly his knuckles went white. You see a broken man who needs your charity. Well, I don't need anything from you people. From the shadows of the staircase, Tamara watched the scene unfold. She recognized the signs, not just physical trauma, but psychological devastation. The man who had controlled billions now couldn't control his own legs. The person who had commanded thousands now felt utterly powerless. Mrs. Patterson tried again, her voice gentler. Why don't we start by getting you to your room? You must be tired, Dash. Don't touch me. James jerked away from her approaching hands so violently that his wheelchair rolled backward. Don't you dare touch me. The nurse froze, her professional composure finally cracking. Tears gathered in her eyes as she realized what the others had learned. This wasn't just difficult patient care. This was a soul in agony, lashing out at anyone who dared witness his brokenness. I can't. Mrs. Patterson whispered to Mrs. Henderson. I'm sorry, but I can't work with someone who won't allow basic care. He needs specialized psychological help, not just nursing. As she gathered her bag and headed for the door, Tamara found herself stepping out of the shadows. Mr. Whitman? Her voice was quiet, steady, cutting through the chaos like a gentle breeze. James's head whipped toward her, his grey eyes blazing with fury. What are you doing here? I told everyone to get out. You told the medical staff to leave, she replied calmly, moving closer despite the warning in his glare. I'm not medical staff. I'm Tamara. I clean your house. I know who you are, he snarled. And I know you're staring at me like all the rest. The mighty billionaire reduced to this. He gestured angrily at his legs. Well, enjoy the show. Tamara studied his face, the pain beneath the anger, the fear beneath the rage. She had seen this before in her clinical rotations, patients who pushed everyone away, because letting people help meant acknowledging how badly they were broken. Actually, she said, I was thinking about your coffee. The unexpected comment made him blink. What? Your coffee? Colombian beans, ground fresh each morning. You haven't had a proper cup in 3 weeks. She tilted her head slightly. The hospital coffee must have been terrible. For a moment, confusion replaced fury in his expression. Of all the things people had said to him, condolences, encouragement, medical jargon, no one had mentioned something so simple, so normal. Why? He started, then stopped, his voice losing some of its edge. Why would you care about my coffee? Tamara took another step closer, noting how his hands trembled slightly on the wheelchair's armrests. Muscle weakness from prolonged bed rest, likely combined with medication side effects and emotional exhaustion. Because, she said simply, some things shouldn't change just because other things have. The silence that followed was different, not empty, but full of unspoken understanding. The orderlies had finished their exit, Mrs. Patterson was gone, and even Mrs. Henderson had retreated, leaving just the maid and the broken billionaire in the vast marble foyer. I don't need a caregiver, James said finally, but his voice had lost its venom. I know, Tamara replied. You need your coffee. What do you think is more important when someone is struggling? Professional help or simple human understanding? Share your thoughts below. Something shifted in his grey eyes, not acceptance, but perhaps the faintest crack in his armor. The beans are in the kitchen. Top cabinet. I know where they are. I've been making your coffee for 2 years. As she moved toward the kitchen, she heard the soft whir of his wheelchair following. When she glanced back, she saw him struggling with the doorway, his inexperienced hands fumbling with the controls. Without thinking, she reached out to help guide the chair. Don't dash, he started, but when her dark fingers brushed against his hands on the controls, he didn't pull away. Her touch was different from the nurse's. Not clinical or pitying, but matter-of-fact, as if helping him navigate was as natural as brewing coffee. In the kitchen, she went through the familiar ritual of grinding beans and preparing the silver service, while James sat by the island, watching her movements. The normalcy of the routine seemed to calm something in him. They all look at me like I'm dying, he said suddenly. Tamara glanced up from measuring coffee grounds. Are you? The blunt question surprised him. What? Are you dying? Because if you're not, then you're living. and living people need coffee. She poured the steaming liquid into his cup, the rich aroma filling the space between them. When she set it in front of him, she noticed his hands shaking as he lifted it to his lips. "It's good," he admitted quietly after the first sip. "Same beans, same method," she replied, beginning to clean the preparation area. "Some things don't have to change." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the only sounds the gentle tick of the kitchen clock and the soft rain against the windows. Finally, James spoke. "The nurses, they want to help me shower, dress me, feed me. They look at me like I'm a child." Tamara continued wiping the counter, not looking at him directly. "Must be frustrating. I built an empire. I employed 50,000 people. I made decisions that affected global markets." His voice cracked slightly. "Now I can't even get to my own bedroom without help." She set down the cloth and turned to face him. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded. "When you were building your empire, did you do everything yourself? Build every office, program every computer, manage every employee?" "Of course not. I had people for Dash," he stopped, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You had people for different skills," she finished gently. "That didn't make you weak then. Why would it make you weak now?" James stared into his coffee cup, processing her words. "It's different. Is it? Or are you just scared?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. His grey eyes met her brown ones, and for the first time since the accident, someone was seeing James Whitman. Not his disability, not his money, not his anger, just him. "I'm terrified," he whispered. The admission seemed to drain the fight out of him. His shoulders sagged, and suddenly he looked every bit as vulnerable as he truly was. Tamara moved around the island until she was standing beside his wheelchair. "That's the most honest thing anyone's said in this house for weeks. I don't know how to be helpless," he continued, his voice barely audible. "I don't know how to need people." "Maybe," she said softly, "you don't have to learn how to be helpless. Maybe you just need to learn how to accept help." She reached out and gently touched his shoulder. Not the clinical touch of a medical professional, but the warm, steady pressure of someone who understood that sometimes healing required more than medicine. He didn't pull away. "I can't pay you to be my nurse," he said. "It wouldn't be appropriate, and besides, you're not certified for this level of care." Tamara smiled slightly. "You're right. I'm not certified yet. But I am trained. 3 years of nursing school before." She gestured vaguely, indicating the circumstances that had brought her to cleaning his floors instead of caring for patients. James studied her face with new interest. 3 years. Had to stop when my mother got sick. Someone needed to work, and medical bills don't pay themselves. She straightened, professional mode sliding into place. "But I remember everything. Patient care, medication management, physical therapy basics, wound care. I just never got to finish the program. Why are you telling me this?" She met his gaze directly. "Because those nurses who keep leaving? They're trained to care for compliant patients who want to get better. You're not compliant, and right now, you don't want to get better. You want to punish yourself and everyone around you." The harsh truth made him flinch, but she continued. "I understand that. I also understand that sometimes healing happens in spite of us, not because of us. And sometimes it takes someone who's been broken too to help put the pieces back together." James was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. Finally, he asked, "What would you need?" "Medical supplies, access to your doctors for care coordination, and the authority to make decisions about your daily care routine." She paused. "And your cooperation. Not compliance, cooperation. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Compliance means doing what you're told because you have to. Cooperation means working together toward a goal because you choose to." He finished his coffee and set the cup down with hands that had stopped shaking. "And what would be our goal?" Tamara considered the question carefully. "Getting you strong enough to decide what kind of life you want to build next. Not the life you had, not the life other people think you should have, but the one you choose." The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 4 o'clock, its deep notes echoing through the house. James sat in his wheelchair, studying the woman who had spent 2 years invisible in his world, and was now offering to become the most important person in it. "I'm not an easy patient," he warned. "I'm not an easy caregiver," she replied with a slight smile. "I tend to push back when people try to give up on themselves. And if I don't get better? If this is as good as it gets?" Tamara's expression grew serious. Then we'll figure out how to make as good as it gets into something worth living for. James Whitman, who had built a billion-dollar empire through calculated risks and strategic decisions, found himself facing the most important choice of his life. Trust the maid who saw him as a person rather than a patient, or continue down the path of isolation and anger. When would you start? He asked quietly. I already have, she replied, gesturing to his empty coffee cup. First rule of good patient care: meet basic needs first. You've had your coffee, you're in familiar surroundings, and you're talking instead of throwing things. Despite himself, James felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. The nurses never mentioned coffee as part of therapy. The nurses never worked as your maid for 2 years. They don't know that you drink exactly 1 3/4 cups every morning, that you read the financial section while you drink it, and that you get cranky when your routine is disrupted. She moved to take his empty cup, and when her fingers brushed his again, neither of them pulled away. So, she said, tomorrow morning, we start with coffee. Then we figure out everything else. As she wheeled him toward the elevator that had been installed for his bedroom access, James realized that for the first time in 3 weeks, he wasn't afraid of tomorrow. The maid who had been invisible had become his lifeline, and somehow, that felt exactly right. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the curtains of James's converted bedroom as Tamara entered with the familiar silver coffee service. The room had been transformed from a sterile medical facility into something warmer. Personal photos on the nightstand, books scattered on the reading table, and the subtle scent of the lavender oil she used in his evening massage routine. James was already awake, propped up in the hospital bed that had replaced his king-size mattress. His brown hair was tousled from sleep, but his grey eyes were alert and focused on the laptop balanced on his legs. Even paralyzed, he couldn't resist checking the overseas markets before dawn. Tokyo's down 3%, he said without looking up as she set the tray on his bedside table. Good morning to you too, Tamara replied with gentle sarcasm, beginning their daily routine. She had long since stopped being surprised by his ability to dive into work before acknowledging basic human interaction. Over the past 6 months, they had developed a rhythm that worked. She had studied his medical files with the thoroughness of a graduate nursing student, coordinating with his doctors and physical therapists to create a comprehensive care plan. More importantly, she had learned to read the subtle signs of his moods, his pain levels, and his frustrations. How's the sensation in your legs this morning? She asked, preparing his medication schedule. Same as yesterday. Same as it'll be tomorrow. His response was automatic, but without the bitter edge it once carried. Tamara moved to open the curtains wider, letting more natural light flood the room. In the early days, he had preferred darkness, but gradually she had coaxed him back toward embracing the day. Dr. Martinez wants to increase your physical therapy sessions. Says your upper body strength has improved significantly. Has it? James finally looked up from his laptop, studying her face as if searching for something. You lifted yourself from the bed to the wheelchair yesterday without assistance, she replied, pouring his coffee to the exact shade of brown he preferred. 3 months ago, that would have been impossible. He accepted the cup, their fingers brushing in the exchange. A contact that had become as natural as breathing, but still sent an inexplicable warmth through both of them. Tamara, he said quietly, I need to ask you something. She settled into the chair beside his bed, the one that had become hers over the months of caring for him. What is it? Why are you still here? The question hung in the air between them. It was one she had asked herself countless times, especially late at night when she returned to her small quarters, exhausted from 12-hour days of patient care. What do you mean? James set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. I mean, 6 months ago, you were a housekeeper saving money for nursing school. Now you're essentially a live-in nurse, but you're still being paid housekeeping wages. Any agency would pay you 3 times what I'm paying you for this level of care. Tamara felt her heart skip slightly. The truth was complicated, involving feelings she wasn't ready to examine and a connection that had grown far beyond professional boundaries. You're right, she said carefully. I could make more money elsewhere. Then why stay? She studied his face, the way his jaw tensed when he was vulnerable, the slight softening around his eyes that only appeared during their quiet moments together. Do you want me to leave? That's not what I asked. It's not what you asked, but it's what you're really wondering. She leaned forward slightly. Are you afraid I'm going to abandon you like the others? James's expression tightened. I'm not afraid of anything. Liar. The word was spoken softly, without malice, but it hit him like a physical blow. In 6 months, she had become the one person who could see through his carefully constructed facades. I'm afraid, he admitted finally, that you're here out of pity, or obligation, or some misguided sense of charity. Tamara was quiet for a long moment, considering her response. The truth was dangerous territory, an admission that would change everything between them. What if I told you, she said slowly, that I stay because somewhere in the past 6 months, taking care of you stopped feeling like a job? Their eyes met and held. The morning light caught the warmth in her brown gaze, and James felt something shift in his chest, a flutter of hope he hadn't dared acknowledge. What does it feel like now? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before she could answer, Mrs. Henderson's voice echoed from the hallway. Tamara, Dr. Martinez is here for Mr. Whitman's appointment. The moment shattered. Tamara stood quickly, her professional mask sliding back into place. We should get you ready for therapy. But James caught her wrist gently as she reached for his medication tray. Tamara, what does it feel like now? She looked down at his hand on her wrist. The first time he had initiated physical contact that wasn't medically necessary. Her pulse quickened under his touch. It feels like coming home, she whispered, then pulled away before he could respond. The physical therapy session was more intense than usual. Dr. Martinez pushed James through exercises designed to maintain muscle tone and improve circulation, while Tamara assisted with transfers and equipment adjustments. She had become skilled at anticipating his needs, handing him towels before he asked, adjusting his position when she saw discomfort in his expression. Remarkable progress, Dr. Martinez commented as James completed a series of upper body exercises. 6 months ago, I wasn't sure we'd see this level of improvement. Tamara deserves the credit, James replied, his eyes finding hers across the room. She's been relentless about sticking to the routine. The doctor smiled. Good caregivers make all the difference. You're fortunate to have someone so dedicated. After Dr. Martinez left, an awkward silence settled between them. The unfinished conversation from the morning hung in the air, creating a tension that was both uncomfortable and electric. I should start lunch, Tamara said, beginning to clean up the therapy equipment. Stay, James said. Please. She paused, her hands stilling on the resistance bands she had been coiling. James, I know this is complicated, he said. I know there are boundaries, professional lines we probably shouldn't cross. But I need you to know that what's happening between us, it's not one-sided. Tamara's breath caught. What do you think is happening between us? I think, he said carefully, that I'm falling in love with the woman who saved my life. And I think she might feel something for me too. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Tamara's mind raced with all the reasons this was impossible. Their different worlds, the power imbalance, the professional ethics she had studied in nursing school. James, she said softly, I'm your caregiver. You depend on me for basic daily functions. The power dynamic dash. The power dynamic? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Tamara, you hold all the power. You decide when I eat, when I take medication, whether I'm clean or comfortable or dignified. You've seen me at my weakest, my most vulnerable. If anyone has power in this relationship, it's you. She moved closer to his wheelchair, kneeling beside it, so they were at eye level. That's not the kind of power I'm talking about, and you know it. Then what kind? The kind that comes with money, with influence, with being able to change someone's life with a single decision. She gestured around the opulent room. You could fire me tomorrow, and I'd be back to scrubbing floors or serving coffee somewhere else. You could decide this conversation never happened, and I'd have no choice but to pretend right along with you. James reached out and gently cupped her face in his hand. Do you really think I would do that to you? The tenderness in his touch made her eyes flutter closed. I think you're a good man who's been hurt and isolated. I think you might be confusing gratitude and dependency with love. And, what do you think you're feeling? She leaned into his touch despite herself. I think I'm a woman who's been taking care of everyone else her whole life. And for the first time, someone is asking about my feelings instead of my services. That's not an answer. Tamara opened her eyes and met his gaze directly. I think I'm falling in love with you too. And it terrifies me. The admission seemed to electrify the air between them. James's thumb traced gently across her cheekbone, and she felt herself leaning closer. Why does it terrify you? Because, she whispered, I've built my whole life around being needed, not being wanted. I don't know the difference anymore. Do you think love can truly exist when one person depends on the other for survival? What's the difference between being needed and being wanted? Share your thoughts below. Before James could respond, she stood abruptly, putting distance between them. I need to think about this. We both do. Tomorrow. Please, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Let me finish lunch. We can talk more tonight. She fled to the kitchen, her heart pounding. In the safety of familiar tasks, chopping vegetables, seasoning meat, setting timers, she tried to process what had just happened. For 6 months, she had told herself that her growing feelings for James were natural but inappropriate. She was his caregiver. He was vulnerable and dependent. It would be unethical to act on any attraction, regardless of whether it was mutual. But hearing him say the words out loud, feeling his touch, seeing the genuine emotion in his eyes, it shattered all her careful rationalization. She loved him. Not as a patient, not as an employer, but as a man. She loved his sharp intellect, his dry humor, his determination to rebuild his life despite devastating circumstances. She loved the way he pushed himself in therapy, the way he still read 3 newspapers every morning, the way he had gradually opened up to her about his fears and dreams. The problem was, she also needed him. The generous salary he paid her was supporting not just herself, but her brother's college tuition and her grandmother's medical expenses. The reference he could provide would open doors to nursing positions she could never access otherwise. Her financial security was entirely dependent on his goodwill. How could she trust her own feelings when her survival was tied to his satisfaction? That evening, she brought his dinner to his room as usual, but the easy intimacy of their morning routine felt strained. They ate in relative silence, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. Finally, James set down his fork and looked at her directly. I've been thinking about what you said. And I want to do something that might help clarify the situation for both of us. Tamara raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I want to pay for you to finish nursing school. The offer hit her like a physical blow. James, no. I can't accept . Let me finish, he said firmly. Not as your employer, and not as someone trying to buy your affection. As someone who believes you deserve to achieve your dreams. I don't understand. James wheeled his chair closer to where she sat. If you finish your nursing degree, you'll have options. Career opportunities that don't depend on me. Financial independence that means you're here by choice, not necessity. Tears gathered in her eyes as she processed what he was offering. You're trying to give me the freedom to leave you. I'm trying to give you the freedom to choose me, he corrected gently. There's a difference. She wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. What if I choose to leave? James's expression was pained, but resolute. Then I'll know you were honest with me, and with yourself. And I'll be grateful for the 6 months when I had you in my life. And if I choose to stay, then I'll know it's because you want to, not because you have to. Tamara stared at him, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. Not just financial support, but freedom. The chance to return to him as an equal, if she chose to return at all. It would take 2 years to complete the program, she said quietly. I know. I'd have to cut back my hours here. You'd need to hire additional help. I know. You might not need me anymore by the time I graduate. James reached across the small table and took her hand. Tamara, I will always need you. The question is whether you'll need me. As she sat there, his hand warm around hers, Tamara realized she was standing at a crossroads that would define the rest of her life. She could stay in the safe, dependent relationship they had built, or she could take the terrifying leap toward independence and equality. Either way, nothing would ever be the same. 18 months later, the lecture hall at Metropolitan Community College buzzed with nervous energy as third-year nursing students prepared for their final practical examination. Tamara sat in the middle row, her dark hair still pulled back in the neat bun she had worn for years, her hands steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. Around her, classmates whispered last-minute review questions and flipped through dog-eared textbooks. But Tamara's mind was elsewhere, back at the Whitman estate, where James was likely starting his morning routine, with the professional care team she had helped him hire and train. "Miss Washington," Professor Chen called from the front of the room. "You'll be testing with standardized patient Mr. Rodriguez today. Scenario: post-surgical care for a spinal injury patient." The irony wasn't lost on her. For the past 18 months, she had been living this scenario daily, balancing her nursing school requirements with modified hours caring for James. It had been the most challenging period of her life. 12-hour school days followed by evening shifts at the estate. Studying medical terminology, she was simultaneously applying in real life, learning patient advocacy, while navigating the complex emotions of caring for someone she loved. As she entered the testing room, Tamara caught her reflection in the observation window. The young woman staring back looked different from the maid who had first offered James coffee 2 years ago. There was confidence in her posture now, authority in her movements. She wore scrubs instead of a housekeeping uniform, and her identity was no longer defined by invisibility. The practical exam went smoothly. Years of caring for James had given her an intuitive understanding of spinal injury care that textbooks couldn't teach. She demonstrated proper transfer techniques, medication administration, and patient communication with the ease of someone who had performed these tasks thousands of times. But as she walked out of the testing center that afternoon, her phone buzzed with a text that made her heart stop. James fell during transfer. Ambulance on the way to Metro General. Mrs. Henderson. Tamara's hands shook as she read the message again. She had trained James's current care team herself, had left detailed protocols for every aspect of his daily routine. How could this have happened? She ran to her car, her mind racing with possibilities. Had he tried to transfer independently? Had there been a medical emergency? Was he hurt? The drive to the hospital felt endless. Traffic lights seemed to last forever, and every red light felt like a personal assault. By the time she reached Metropolitan General's emergency department, she was barely holding herself together. "James Whitman," she gasped to the reception nurse. He was brought in by ambulance. "Spinal injury patient, fall during transfer." "Are you family?" the nurse asked automatically. Tamara hesitated. For nearly 2 years, she had been the most important person in James's life, had made medical decisions, had coordinated his care. But officially, legally, she was nothing more than an employee. I'm his primary caregiver," she said finally. The nurse's expression softened with understanding. "Room 314. He's stable, but the doctor will want to speak with you about his care history." Tamara rushed down the familiar hospital corridors, her nursing school training warring with personal panic. She knew enough about spinal injuries to understand that a fall could be catastrophic, could undo months of progress, could cause additional damage, She forced herself to stop. Professional assessment first, emotional reaction second. The lessons James had taught her about controlling fear in crisis situations applied here too. When she pushed through the door of room 314, she found James sitting up in the hospital bed, his brown hair disheveled, but his grey eyes alert and focused. He was arguing with a young resident about discharge procedures. "I don't need to stay overnight for observation," he was saying firmly. "I know my body better than Dash." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw her in the doorway. "Tamara." The relief in his voice was unmistakable. She moved to his bedside, her trained eyes quickly assessing him for obvious injury. No bandages, no apparent distress, normal coloring. "What happened?" "Marcus tried to transfer me from bed to wheelchair without following the protocol you established," James explained, his jaw tightening with frustration. "Instead of waiting for assistance, he tried to do it alone. I shifted my weight to help him, and we both went down." "Are you hurt?" She was fighting the urge to touch him, to run her hands over his arms and chest checking for injury, the way she would have done automatically before. "Bruised ego more than anything else. Some scrapes on my hands from catching myself." He held up his palms, showing minor abrasions. "But they want to do a full spinal assessment to make sure there's no additional damage." The young resident looked up from his chart. "You must be the caregiver," Mrs. Henderson mentioned. "We'll need a complete history of his care protocols and any recent changes in his condition." For the next hour, Tamara found herself in the strange position of being both James's advocate and a consulting medical professional. She reviewed his care plan with the medical team, explained the transfer techniques that had been working successfully, and provided detailed information about his progress over the past months. Remarkable, the attending physician commented after reviewing James's records. His muscle tone and circulation are significantly better than I would expect for someone with his level of injury. Whoever designed his care protocol clearly knows what they're doing. Tamara felt a flush of pride, but it was tempered by the realization of how close they had come to losing all that progress. As the medical team left to process discharge paperwork, she and James were finally alone. "I was so scared," she admitted, sinking into the chair beside his bed. "Scared I was hurt. Scared I wasn't there when you needed me." James studied her face, noting the exhaustion around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. "Tamara, you can't be everywhere at once. That's why we hired additional help. Help that doesn't follow protocols," she said bitterly. "Help that nearly undid 2 years of progress because they got careless. Help that made a mistake," James corrected gently. "The same kind of mistake you might have made if you were overtired from trying to balance school and caregiving duties." His words hit her like a slap. "Are you saying this is my fault?" "I'm saying this is exactly why I insisted you focus on your education. You've been trying to do everything. Be my caregiver, be a full-time student, manage my entire care team from a distance. Something had to give." Tamara felt tears of frustration building. "So you're suggesting I should have dropped out of school?" "I'm suggesting," James said carefully, "that maybe it's time for both of us to face some hard truths." "What do you mean?" James was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes searching her face. "Tamara, in 3 weeks you'll graduate nursing school. You'll have your degree, your independence, your freedom to choose any path you want." "Yes, and I've been recovering. Slowly but steadily. I can transfer independently now, when proper protocols are followed. I can manage many of my daily activities without assistance. I don't need the level of care I required 2 years ago." A cold fear began building in her chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe the reason you're so afraid of not being there when I need you is because you're afraid of discovering that I don't need you anymore." The words hung in the air between them like an accusation. Tamara felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "That's not." She started, then stopped. Was it true? Had her identity become so wrapped up in being indispensable that she couldn't imagine a relationship based on choice rather than necessity? "When you first started caring for me," James continued, "I was broken, angry, completely dependent. You were my lifeline, my connection to hope. But we're different people now, aren't we?" Tamara wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Are you firing me?" "I'm asking you what you want," he said softly. "Not what you think I need, not what you think you should want, but what you actually want for your life. In your opinion, can a relationship that started from dependency ever become truly equal? What would it take for both people to move from need to choice? Share your thoughts below." She stared at him, this man who had been the center of her world for 2 years, and realized she didn't know how to answer. Her entire adult life had been defined by taking care of others. Her sick mother, her younger brother, her aging grandmother, and finally James. Who was she when she wasn't needed? "I don't know," she whispered. "Then I think," James said gently, "it's time for you to find out." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of final exams, graduation preparations, and painful conversations. James had returned home from the hospital with no lasting damage from his fall, but the incident had forced both of them to confront the changing nature of their relationship. Tamara continued her modified care schedule, but now every interaction felt charged with uncertainty. They were both walking on eggshells, afraid to address the elephant in the room. What would happen after graduation? The night before her graduation ceremony, Tamara sat in her small quarters packing her belongings. Her nursing textbooks, worn from years of study, were finally being boxed up. The small space that had been home for over 2 years felt like a museum of her old life. A soft knock interrupted her packing. "Come in." James wheeled into her room, his expression serious. It was the first time he had visited her quarters since his accident, and she was acutely aware of how small and modest the space seemed compared to the opulent rooms where she usually saw him. "Packing," he observed, noting the boxes stacked against the wall. "Some things. I'll need them for my apartment. You found a place?" Tamara nodded. "A 1-bedroom near Metro General. I start work there Monday as a floor nurse." James was quiet for a moment, processing this information. You took the hospital job. Yes. Not the private duty position with the Patterson family? I thought you were considering that. She had been considering it. A position caring for an elderly woman with dementia, private room and board included, salary twice what the hospital offered. It would have been the safe choice, the familiar choice. I need to learn who I am when I'm not someone's entire world, she said simply. James wheeled closer to where she sat on her narrow bed. And you think working at the hospital will teach you that? I think working with a team of professionals, having colleagues and supervisors and a life outside of patient care will teach me that. She looked up at him. I need to know I can succeed in the real world, not just in the protected environment you created for me. Is that what you think I did? Protected you? Tamara considered the question carefully. I think you gave me an opportunity to grow and learn, but always within the safety net of your world. I never had to compete for a position, never had to prove myself to strangers, never had to navigate office politics or difficult colleagues. And now you want to? I want to know that I can. James reached out and took her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after 2 years of intimate daily contact. What if you discover that you can handle anything the world throws at you? What then? Then I'll know that if I choose to come back to you, it's because I want to, not because I'm afraid I can't survive anywhere else. And if you discover that you prefer the hospital, that you like having colleagues and a normal schedule, and a life that doesn't revolve around one person's needs. Tamara felt her throat tighten. Then I'll know that too. They sat in silence for several minutes, her small hand encompassed by his larger one, both of them processing the magnitude of what was happening. After 2 years of gradual emotional intimacy, they were choosing to step apart, to test whether their connection could survive independence. I love you, James said suddenly. The words, spoken so simply and directly, made her breath catch. James, I need to say it officially before you leave. I love you. Not as my caregiver, not as someone I depend on, but as the woman who saved my life and then challenged me to rebuild it better than before. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I love you too. Then why does this feel like goodbye? Because it is, she whispered. Not forever, but for now. We both need to discover who we are separately before we can know if we belong together. James lifted their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Promise me something. What? Promise me that whatever you discover about yourself, whatever path you choose, you'll be honest about it. Don't come back to me out of guilt or obligation or some misguided sense of loyalty. And you promise me something too. Anything. Promise me you'll keep recovering, keep building your life, keep finding reasons to hope that have nothing to do with me. He smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. I promise, though I reserve the right to hope that one of those reasons might eventually include you again. The next morning, Tamara Washington walked across the graduation stage in her cap and gown, her family cheering from the audience. Mrs. Henderson had come to represent the Whitman household, wiping away tears as Tamara's name was called. But James wasn't there. They had agreed that her graduation should be her moment, her achievement, without the complication of their unresolved relationship overshadowing her success. As she accepted her nursing degree, Tamara felt a profound sense of completion. Not just of her education, but of a chapter of her life that had transformed her from an invisible Maid into a confident medical professional. 2 days later, she moved into her small apartment and began her new life as a hospital nurse. For the first time in her adult life, she was completely independent, financially, professionally, and emotionally. It was terrifying. It was also the most empowering thing she had ever done. 2 years later, the emergency department at Metropolitan General Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos as Tamara Washington moved efficiently between patients. Her dark hair was still pulled back in a neat bun, but now she wore navy scrubs with confidence, a stethoscope draped around her neck like a badge of honor. Tamara, we've got a multi-vehicle accident coming in, called Dr. Sarah Chun from the trauma bay. ETA 5 minutes. I need you on the spinal injury case. On it, Tamara replied, quickly finishing the insertion she was performing on an elderly patient. Over the past 2 years, she had become known for her exceptional skill with spinal injury patients, her intuitive understanding of their needs, and her ability to communicate with families during the most frightening moments of their lives. As the ambulance doors burst open, paramedics wheeled in a young man, his face pale with pain and fear. 23-year-old male, fell from construction scaffolding, possible spinal compression at L2. Tamara moved into action, her hands steady as she helped transfer the patient to the trauma bed. As she worked, checking vital signs and preparing equipment, she saw something familiar in the young man's eyes. The same terror she had once seen in James's face, the fear of a future suddenly uncertain. "What's your name?" she asked gently as Dr. Chen examined him. "Marcus," he whispered. "Marcus Thompson. I can't feel my legs." "I know you're scared," Tamara said, her voice calm and professional. "But you're in good hands. Dr. Chen is one of the best trauma surgeons in the state, and I'm going to be right here with you through everything." As they worked to stabilize Marcus, Tamara found herself thinking about how far she had come. 2 years ago, she had been afraid to trust her own medical knowledge, had felt like an imposter playing at being a nurse. Now, she was the person others turned to in crisis situations, the one who could provide both clinical expertise and emotional support. After Marcus was transferred to surgery, Tamara stepped outside for a brief break. The afternoon sun felt warm on her face as she reflected on the case. Every spinal injury patient reminded her of James, but no longer with the sharp pain of loss. Instead, she felt a deep gratitude for the lessons their relationship had taught her, about healing, about hope, about the difference between helping someone survive and helping them live. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother Marcus. Yes, they shared the same name as her patient, one of those strange coincidences that made her smile. Her brother was now in his senior year at Howard University, studying business, his tuition covered by the college fund she had been building since starting her hospital job. Sis got into the graduate program. Full scholarship. Mom would be so proud. Tamara felt tears prick her eyes. Their mother would indeed be proud, not just of Marcus's success, but of the journey that had brought them all to this point. As she was preparing to return to the ED, her phone rang. Mrs. Henderson's name appeared on the screen. "Tamara, dear, I hope I'm not disturbing you at work." "Not at all, Mrs. Henderson. Is everything all right?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Actually, I'm calling because Mr. Whitman asked me to. He has something he'd like to discuss with you, if you're willing." Tamara's heart skipped. In the 2 years since she had left the estate, she and James had maintained minimal contact. Occasional texts on holidays, a congratulations card when she passed her nursing boards, a brief phone call when her grandmother had been hospitalized. They had both honored their agreement to give each other space to grow. "What kind of something?" she asked carefully. He wouldn't say. Just asked if you might be free for dinner tomorrow evening. He said to tell you it's important, but not urgent, and that if you're uncomfortable with the idea. "No," Tamara said quickly. "I mean, yes. I'll come. What time?" After hanging up, she stood in the hospital parking lot feeling as nervous as a teenager. What could James want to discuss after 2 years? Had something happened to his health? Was he getting married to someone else? The thought made her stomach clench with unexpected jealousy. That evening, she stood in front of her closet, trying to decide what to wear. Professional, but not stuffy. Attractive, but not desperate. She settled on a simple black dress and the pearl necklace her mother had left her. Elegant, but understated. The kind of outfit that could handle any conversation. The drive to the Whitman estate felt surreal. As she pulled through the familiar gates, she was struck by how different the grounds looked. The gardens were more elaborate now, the pathways wider and more accessible. Someone had clearly invested significant time and money in making the property more welcoming. Mrs. Henderson met her at the door with a warm embrace. "Oh, it's so good to see you, dear. You look wonderful, so confident, so grown up. How is he?" Tamara asked as they walked through the familiar marble foyer. "See for yourself." The living room had been transformed. Gone were the heavy, masculine furnishings of James's previous life. Instead, the space felt warm and open, with comfortable seating arrangements and soft lighting that invited conversation rather than intimidated visitors. James was standing by the fireplace when she entered, standing, not sitting in his wheelchair. He wore dark slacks and a casual button-down shirt, his brown hair styled but relaxed, his facial hair neatly trimmed. He looked healthier than she had ever seen him, his grey eyes bright with an energy that took her breath away. "You're standing," she said, stating the obvious because she couldn't quite process what she was seeing. I am, he replied with a smile that transformed his entire face. It's been gradual over the past year. I can't walk long distances, and I still use the wheelchair for most activities, but I have enough function now to stand for short periods. James, that's... She felt tears gathering in her eyes. That's incredible. It is. And you're part of the reason it happened. She shook her head. I haven't been here. Whatever progress you've made happened because you taught me that recovery isn't just about accepting help. It's about believing you deserve to get better. He gestured to a comfortable sofa. Will you sit? We have a lot to talk about. As they settled across from each other, Tamara was acutely aware of how different this felt from their previous interactions. There was no caregiver-patient dynamic, no power imbalance, no underlying tension about dependency. They were simply two adults who had shared an extraordinary experience and were now reuniting as equals. Tell me about the hospital, James said. How do you like it? I love it, she replied, and realized she meant it completely. It's challenging, sometimes heartbreaking, but also incredibly rewarding. I work with an amazing team, and every day I learn something new. I heard you were nominated for Nurse of the Year. Tamara blushed. How did you hear about that? Dr. Martinez mentioned it. He still consults on my care occasionally, and he's very proud of your success. They talked for nearly an hour about her work, his business interests, their families, their lives. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by comfortable silences and shared laughter. It felt like talking to an old friend, someone who knew her history but wasn't trapped by it. Finally, James's expression grew serious. Tamara, I asked you here because I wanted to share something with you. Something I've been working on for the past year. Okay. He reached for a folder on the coffee table and handed it to her. Open it. Inside, she found architectural drawings, business plans, and legal documents. As she scanned the papers, her confusion grew. I don't understand. What is this? It's a medical facility, James explained, specifically designed for long-term care of spinal injury patients and their families. State-of-the-art rehabilitation equipment, private rooms that feel like home, comprehensive support services. Tamara studied the drawings more carefully. The proposed building was beautiful, modern but warm, with natural light and healing gardens, accessible design that maintained dignity and independence. It's incredible, but why are you showing me this? James leaned forward slightly. Because I want you to run it. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? I want you to be the director of nursing. Not just a staff nurse, not an assistant. The person who designs the care protocols, hires and trains the nursing staff, creates the culture of the entire facility. Tamara stared at him, speechless. Before you say anything, James continued, let me be clear about what I'm offering and what I'm not. This isn't charity, and it's not a romantic gesture. This is a legitimate job, offer based on your qualifications and experience. The salary is competitive with what you'd make as a charge nurse at Metro General after 5 years of experience. You'd have full autonomy over medical decisions, your own budget, and a board of directors that includes some of the most respected names in spinal medicine. James, I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider it. The facility won't be completed for another 18 months, which gives you time to finish your bachelor's degree part-time if you want, or pursue specialized certifications. She looked up from the papers, her mind reeling. Why are you doing this? Because when I was at my lowest point, lying in that hospital bed believing my life was over, a young woman with nursing training and healing hands refused to let me give up. His voice grew soft with emotion. She taught me that recovery isn't just about regaining physical function. It's about finding purpose, about using your experience to help others. So this is about gratitude? This is about impact, James corrected. You saved my life, Tamara. But more than that, you showed me what compassionate, expert care could accomplish. Now I want to create a place where other people can experience that same level of healing. Tamara felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. I need time to think about this. Of course. Take all the time you need. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both processing the weight of the conversation. Finally, Tamara spoke. Can I ask you something personal? Anything. Are you offering me this job because you want me back in your life, or because you genuinely think I'm the right person for it? James met her gaze directly. Both. But I want you to know that the job offer stands regardless of what happens between us personally. What do you mean? He stood up carefully and moved to sit beside her on the sofa. I mean that I'm still in love with you, Tamara. I've spent 2 years trying to convince myself that what we had was just gratitude and dependency. But it's not true. I love who you are, who you've become, who you were even before you ever took care of me. Her breath caught. James. But I also know that you needed to discover your own strength, your own identity, your own worth. And watching you succeed these past 2 years, hearing about your accomplishments, seeing the confident woman sitting across from me tonight, I know that you've found all of those things. What do you think it takes for 2 people to move from needing each other to choosing each other? Is it possible to have both professional and personal relationships that are truly equal? Share your thoughts below. Tamara felt tears spilling down her cheeks. I love you too. I never stopped loving you. Then marry me. The proposal was so simple, so direct, that it took her a moment to process what he had said. Marry you. James reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I know it's complicated, with the job offer and our history and everything we've been through. But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Not as your patient, not as your employer, but as your partner in everything. He opened the box to reveal a stunning but understated engagement ring. A classic solitaire that was elegant without being ostentatious. I picked something simple, he said with a slight smile. I figured you'd want to be able to wear it while working. Tamara stared at the ring, then at James, then back at the ring. 2 years ago, a proposal from him would have felt like a fairy tale, the maid becoming a princess. Now it felt like something entirely different and infinitely more valuable. 2 people who had grown into themselves choosing to grow together. Yes, she whispered. Yes to the marriage proposal, or yes to the job offer? Yes to both. Yes to everything. As James slipped the ring onto her finger, Tamara felt a profound sense of completion. Not because she was being rescued or elevated, but because she was choosing to build a life with someone who saw her as an equal partner. When? She asked, admiring the way the diamond caught the firelight. Whenever you want. Tomorrow, next year, whenever feels right to you. I want a real wedding, she said firmly. Not huge, but real. With my family and friends, with Mrs. Henderson and Dr. Martinez, and everyone who's been part of our journey. Whatever you want. She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his shoulder supporting her. I can't believe this is really happening. Which part? All of it. The job, the proposal, the fact that you're standing, the fact that I'm confident enough to say yes to both. She tilted her head to look at him. 2 years ago, I would have been terrified that I wasn't good enough for any of this. And now I know that I've earned it. All of it. James pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head. You've earned so much more than this, Tamara. You've earned a lifetime of happiness. 6 months later, the garden at the Whitman estate had been transformed into a wedding venue that was both elegant and intimate. White chairs arranged in neat rows faced an arch of roses and peonies, while string lights twinkled overhead in the gathering dusk. Tamara stood in the bridal suite that had once been her small staff quarters, now expanded and renovated into a beautiful guest room. Her wedding dress was simple but stunning, a flowing A-line gown that allowed her to move freely while still feeling like a princess. Mrs. Henderson, who had become like a second mother to her, adjusted her veil with tears in her eyes. You look absolutely radiant, dear. I feel like I'm dreaming, Tamara admitted, smoothing the pearl necklace that had been her mother's. You're not dreaming. You're living the life you've worked so hard to create. Through the window, Tamara could see the guests arriving. Her brother Marcus, now a graduate student. Her grandmother, beaming with pride in her wheelchair. Dr. Martinez and several colleagues from the hospital. And James's business associates who had become genuine friends over the years. At the altar, James waited in his wheelchair, having decided that comfort was more important than standing for appearances. He looked handsome in his dark suit, his grey eyes scanning the crowd until they found the window where she stood. Even from a distance, the love in his expression took her breath away. The ceremony was perfect in its simplicity. Tamara walked down the aisle to music played by a string quartet, her steps confident and sure. When she reached James, he took her hands in his, and she could see the tears of joy in his eyes. You look beautiful, he whispered. You clean up pretty well yourself, she replied with a smile. The minister spoke about love that grows through adversity, about partnerships that are strengthened by individual growth, about the power of choosing each other daily. When it came time for vows, James went first. "Tamara," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the garden, "you saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You taught me that strength isn't about never needing help. It's about accepting help gracefully and using it to become who you're meant to be. I promise to spend the rest of my life supporting your dreams, celebrating your successes, and loving you not for what you do for me, but for who you are." Tamara's vows were equally heartfelt. "James, you gave me the gift of believing in myself. You showed me that love isn't about losing yourself in someone else. It's about becoming your best self alongside someone who sees your worth. I promise to be your partner in all things, to build a life with you based on choice rather than need, and to love you for exactly who you are, in whatever circumstances life brings us." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, James reached up from his wheelchair to cup Tamara's face in his hands, and their kiss was witnessed by everyone who had been part of their extraordinary journey. 1 year later, the Washington Whitman Spinal Care Center opened its doors on a bright spring morning, with Tamara Washington Whitman serving as its first director of nursing. The facility was everything the architectural drawings had promised, a place where people could heal with dignity, where families could find hope, where recovery was measured not just in medical milestones, but in reclaimed dreams. On opening day, Tamara stood in the lobby greeting the first patients and their families. She wore professional attire that reflected her authority and expertise, her wedding ring catching the light as she shook hands and offered reassurance. The first patient was a young woman named Sarah, paralyzed in a car accident just weeks earlier. Her eyes held the same fear and despair Tamara had once seen in James's face. "I don't know how to do this," Sarah whispered to her mother. "I don't know how to live like this." Tamara knelt beside Sarah's wheelchair, bringing herself to eye level. "You don't have to know how yet," she said gently. "You just have to be willing to learn, one day at a time. And you won't be learning alone." As she showed Sarah and her family around the facility, explaining the care protocols and introducing them to the staff, Tamara felt a profound sense of purpose. This was what her journey had been building toward, not just her own healing and growth, but the ability to guide others through their own transformations. That evening, she and James sat on the deck of their home. The estate had been renovated to include a separate wing where they lived as equals, partners in both marriage and the mission of the care center. "How did it feel?" James asked, referring to the center's opening day. "Like coming full circle," Tamara replied, curling up beside him in the outdoor furniture designed for accessibility and comfort. "Like everything we went through had a purpose beyond just us." James reached for her hand, their wedding rings catching the light of the setting sun. "I have something to tell you." "What?" "The board approved your proposal for the scholarship program. We'll be able to provide full nursing school funding for 10 students each year, students who might not otherwise have the opportunity." Tamara felt tears of joy gathering in her eyes. The scholarship program had been her idea, a way to ensure that financial barriers wouldn't prevent other young people from pursuing careers in healthcare. "Really? Really?" The first recipients will be announced next month. As they sat together watching the sun set over the grounds that had witnessed their entire journey, from employer and employee to patient and caregiver to husband and wife to business partners, Tamara reflected on how far they had both traveled. She was no longer the invisible maid who cleaned marble floors and dreamed of nursing school. She was a respected healthcare professional, a wife, a leader, a woman who had discovered her own worth and chosen to share her life with someone who valued that worth. James was no longer the isolated billionaire who measured his worth by his ability to control everything around him. He was a husband, a partner in meaningful work, a man who had learned that true strength came from vulnerability and true success came from lifting others up. "Do you ever wonder," Tamara asked, "what would have happened if I had never started working here? If you had never had the accident? If we had never met?" James considered the question seriously. "I think we would have lived smaller lives. Safe, maybe, but smaller. And now we're living the biggest life I can imagine. Not because of the money or the business success, but because we're living it together, using everything we learned from our struggles to help other people find their own strength." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Tamara Washington Whitman, former maid, registered nurse, director of nursing, wife, and partner in healing, felt a deep contentment settle over her. The journey from invisibility to empowerment had been difficult, sometimes painful, but it had led her exactly where she belonged. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, the young patient they had admitted that morning. "Thank you for today. For the first time since my accident, I have hope." Tamara smiled and showed the message to James. This was their true success, not the love story that had grown between them, beautiful as it was, but the ripple effect of healing that would touch countless lives in the years to come. The maid who had once been invisible had become a beacon of hope for others, and the broken billionaire, who had once pushed everyone away, had learned to build bridges instead of walls. Together, they had discovered that the greatest recovery of all was learning to transform pain into purpose and individual healing into collective hope.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.